These sounds are often the most haunting to us. We all know it for that specific reason. Many people never wish for this day to become a reality in our lives. But what if I told you that you're more likely to be in a car crash, plane crash, struck by lightning than to ever hear these sounds? I know many would say that is a blasphemous claim to make, but I'm telling you the truth. The word nuclear, many of us shy away at the sheer sight of the word nuclear. It's been ingrained to the majority of the population that it's inherently dangerous to handle, damaging to organic life, causes sickness, will explode, has radioactive waste, and inevitably will lead to the destruction of humanity as we know it. Let's dive into the history of nuclear energy, how it's beneficial to us, the environment, and why there are so many misconceptions of nuclear energy as a whole. Ironically, the reason behind the development of the atomic bombs also helped with the development of the first nuclear reactor that was made by the United States, which occurred on December 2nd, 1942 in the state of Illinois at the University of Chicago, called the CP-1 or Chicago Pile 1. 49 scientists gathered to test a criticality experiment. This experiment was made to observe a phenomenon called a nuclear chain reaction. The reactor was, quote, a 20-foot tall pile of graphite blocks that were studded with hundreds of smaller blocks of uranium. It took the scientists 28 minutes to conduct this experiment, and it would ultimately prove that not only could we create a chain reaction, but a self-sustaining chain reaction. Ultimately, this experiment would also lead to the atomic bombs being made and used in the Second World War on Japan. But as further experiments improved, other projects were conducted. One of these projects was called the EBR-1 reactor. One of the first nuclear reactors that could produce a usable and stable amount of electricity in the US was on December 20th, 1951 in the state of Idaho, called the EBR-1 or Experimental Breeder Reactor 1. During this time of the experimental stage, it was confirmed that this type of energy could bring more energy than it consumes. The EBR-1 reactor operated for more than 12 years before it was ultimately shut down. From this knowledge, another reactor was due to be made called the EBR-2 or Experimental Breeder Reactor 2, which started operation in 1964 and lasted until 1994, until it was ultimately shut down by the United States Senate, who deemed the project as excessive spending that ceased further operation. If this type of reactor design was implemented for the primary use of the United States instead of the PWR and BWR reactors, it could have revolutionized the next generation of nuclear reactors with its improved fail-safe features for both environmental and human error disasters that would have caused a meltdown. Unfortunately, it was decommissioned and demolished with the 2009 American Recovery Act. Though this story is bittersweet, there are still new and improved reactor designs being made that will be implemented as we move further with our advancement in nuclear energy. Now, I'm sure you're probably asking, how exactly is nuclear energy better? Well, to start off, it has a lower carbon emission rate than any non-renewable forms of energy by far. According to energy.gov, all of the United States waste from the last 60 years could fit into a football field with a depth of less than 10 yards. It can even produce more energy per land mass than solar or wind turbines. For example, a 1,000 megawatt nuclear reactor has a square area a little more than a mile. In order for solar or wind to equate to this 1,000 megawatt energy output, you need more than 360 times the land area for air and 75 times the land area for solar to even acquire the same amount of energy output as a nuclear reactor does. Not only that, but its efficiency rate far exceeds any other non-renewables and renewables by an even bigger margin. According to energy.gov, nuclear energy has a 92.5 efficiency rate, which is almost double of other forms of non-renewables such as natural gas with a 56.6% efficiency rate, coal has a 40.2% efficiency rate, wind with a 35.4% efficiency rate, solar with a 24.9% efficiency rate, hydro with a 41.5% efficiency rate, and geothermal with a 74.3% efficiency rate. Now, let's dive into those misconceptions. Here's a common misconception that I'm sure you've heard before. Nuclear energy is dangerous and it will release radiation into the environment and will result in many people dying if it were to have a meltdown. Yes, it is true that radiation exposure can cause health complications, particularly increased levels of cancer. That is why there are fail-safes which help stop any form of radiation exposure that being operators or the environment. According to the World Nuclear Association, all Western reactors have plans to help mitigate radiation if a situation arises. It's called SAMG, or Severe Accident Mitigation Guidelines. These guidelines were specifically made to help in case a disaster of any form were to happen. They have been rigorously tested if radiation exposure were to occur. The US NRC, or Nuclear Regulatory Commission, specifies that reactors are designed to have theoretical core damage assessments for meltdowns and or accidents occurring. This baseline number is 1 to 10,000 years, but modern designs that are in use exceed this within 1 in 100,000 years. Future reactors that are to be built within the next decade will have a specified expectancy of 1 to 1 million years of a degraded core or core meltdown accident occurring. A second common misconception is that many people don't even understand the difference between nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons. They both function similarly, but are used vastly differently in society. Here's a quick explanation of how modern nuclear reactors work versus nuclear weapons. Nuclear reactors use a method called nuclear fission. It's when two atoms smash together, typically uranium, and produce energy of smaller and lighter nuclei. The uranium consists of small pellets. They are concealed in metal tubes called fuel rods. These rods are surrounded by water that act as a coolant and moderator to help sustain the chain reaction. Typically, there are over 200 of these fuel rods in one reactor. The form of energy that we use from the reactor is thermal energy or heat. This thermal energy can be used to turn water into steam, which is then used to turn a turbine to produce electricity. Nuclear weapons can use both fission and another method called fusion. Fusion works in reverse from fission. When extreme high temperatures and pressures are stimulated, lightweight nuclei can fuse to form heavier nuclei, which releases an abundance of energy. This is why nuclear weapons can use nuclear fission to effectively start a nuclear fusion reaction for a more destructive bomb. A third misconception is that nuclear energy is quite damaging to humans. Even in disasters, nuclear energy is the safest form of all non-renewables. If we want to compare a total death count from other sources of non-renewables to nuclear energy, it isn't even a fair comparison. According to the School of Public Health, Harvard, the number annually is 8 million people around the globe. That equates to 1 in 5 deaths is due to fossil fuels being released into the atmosphere. In the United States alone, 350,000 premature infant deaths are attributed to fossil fuels, such as natural gas, oil, and coal. Yet for some reason, this isn't talked about all that much or covered in the media, which is quite sad. And lastly, the final misconception is, how do we know that it won't happen again? We've all heard of the horrific stories of the nuclear disasters that have happened, from the Chernobyl reactor meltdown back in 1986, the 3 Mile Island meltdown in 1979, and the more recent event that happened in Fukushima back in 2011. They all were chilling and quite unfortunate in their own right. You're probably thinking hundreds, maybe even thousands died from all 3 of these disasters. But you would be surprised to find out that there's less than 100 total confirmed deaths from all nuclear meltdown disasters throughout history. From these failures, 2 of them were due to human error and 1 was due to a tsunami that damaged the reactor's coolant, which ultimately caused the meltdown. Something that the reactor wasn't designed to withstand, but no one was exposed from the meltdown in Fukushima, nor was anyone exposed from the 3 Mile Island meltdown either. The only one that stood out and largely contributed to the death toll was Chernobyl. According to the worldnuclear.org, more than 130,000 people received more than the above internationally accepted ICRP limits. Of the confirmed cases from 1991 to 2015, 20,000 people developed thyroid cancer for ages 18 and under at the time of the accident. The article also states that from 1991 to 2005, there were 6,848 cases, of which 15 proved to be fatal. This accident was the only case where many suffered from something that could have been prevented. But since then, every nuclear reactor now has new and tested methods to deal with such an event. Unfortunately, accidents will occur in the future, But that is why we prepare with such intensity that we can make sure if another situation were to happen, we mitigate it. So much, in fact, that no one in the far future will ever have to suffer the consequences like we did in the past. So, to summarize what I have shared with you about nuclear energy, we now know that A, it is a far better alternative when compared to any other non-renewable energy resources. B, it outperforms natural gas, oil, and coal by a huge margin with little waste. And C, the probability of any form of disaster happening from radiation exposure or meltdown is so small that even if it does happen, the numerous fail-safes which are designed to mitigate such events will be effective at stopping those from even harming you and the environment around from danger. So, I hope my persuasive presentation was up to par. If you think that it was good, let me know in the comments. If not, then I hope everything goes well for you. Thank you and have a wonderful day.